Well, hey guys, in this video, I'm going to show you how to bounce down in Logic so that we have a final stereo file, a WAV file or an MP3 that we can share with somebody else, we can put in our phones or iTunes. Over the past few videos, I've been working with a single track of a spoken word baptism recording for LCBC Church, but I'm also going to go over how to bounce down when you have multiple tracks, like with a song demo, an instrumental piece, or something similar to that. So if you're doing several of these baptism recordings, you're going to want to make sure you have them all on individual channels so that you have individual control over each volume fader and plugin settings for each of the individual recordings. So here I have each of them on separate tracks. And you're also going to want to double check the EQing of each of these to make sure that they're all EQ'd kind of relative to each other. You don't want one too bright or one too bassy or too muffled compared to another. So this is maybe where you'd make those fine adjustments and get them all to sound in coherence with each other. So in the same way, I want to make sure that each individual recording has the same relative volume as the next. If you've been following all the steps in the previous videos, you shouldn't need to do this too much, maybe a dB or two here or there. But the easiest way I found to do this is to have one recording kind of be your benchmark for volume. So let's say for me, that's baptism recording 1. What I could do is I can go in and I can listen to each other track here, other recording compared to 1. And make adjustments in that. So let's say baptism 2 was a little bit too loud compared to baptism 1. I could bring the volume down just a smidge here on the volume fader. And let's say though that you had volume automation here, in which case I wouldn't want to try and adjust my overall volume with the volume fader because that volume fader is already attached to the automation lane. So in that case, what I would want to do is I could do it two ways. I could go to the compressor that's on that channel, and I can boost the output gain a little bit here or take it away if I need to make it a little bit quieter. Or I could go to the last FX slot in the chain and add a gain plugin. So go to Logic, and let's go to Utility, and we can use the gain plugin to add or take away a little bit of volume. So with each of these baptism recordings, one thing I want to make sure is that the very first word of that baptism recordings starts no earlier than a second in. So I want that to be consistent for each recording. So here's a little tip. If you're recording something that's out of time or not to tempo or not to a metronome, I would set your tempo to either 60 or in my case I have 120. That way on each of the measures or the beats, I'm on the second, or in this case at 120 BPM, I'm at the half second for each beat. So here at measure 4, I'm at 6 seconds. And then measure 4 beat 1, I'm at 6.5 seconds. And this is going to make it easy for me to kind of move my time point here, or when we get to doing the locators, it's going to be easy to snap it to those positions. So for our first baptism recording, this first word right now is coming in about 0.65 into 0.65 seconds in. If I would start bouncing from measure 5. So let's grab all of it. And I'm going to just, to select all the regions, I'm just going to click on the track header, and then you can see they're all highlighted here. Make sure I highlight all of these before I slide all of them. And I just want to make sure that this first word comes in right after the first second. So here we're at 8 seconds. That's 9 seconds. So this is about 9.25 or so. And that's where I want it to come in. Now I can go to each of the other recordings. And let's blow this up a little bit, zoom in, and I can match all of these to that first one. You can see baptism 2. Well, I could probably move this a little bit. You don't have to get super accurate with this. And baptism 3, you can see it's kind of far off there. And so now when I bounce down from measure 5, I'm going to have about 1.25 seconds before the very first word comes in for each of the recordings. Now let's go and add a limiter to our final master output, our stereo output here in Logic. So we're going to go to our stereo output channel, and let's go down to Logic, let's choose Dynamics, and we're going to add the adaptive limiter. So a limiter is very similar to a compressor. The only difference is that a compressor is going to allow some audio signal to go past its threshold, partly because of the attack time, or a slower attack time is going to allow more of the audio to go past the threshold. But a limiter is going to block all audio from going past the threshold. And this is why we want to put a limiter on our final output, so we don't have anything crossing over that 0 dB output, which would cause distortion. So taking a look at some of the controls on the adaptive limiter here, this gain knob is the input gain going into the limiter. And right now it's set at 3 dB. And this input gain is really going to dictate the final output level for our final track. So we don't want to do anything with this stereo output as far as moving this up or down. We want to keep this at unity at 0 dB. We're going to adjust the final volume with this input gain knob. And we definitely want it to be louder, kind of than what we've been working out here in Logic. We want it to kind of rival, in some ways, the other things that would be maybe playing back on your phone or on iTunes. And what we're looking for is to, for the baptism recordings in particular, we're looking to peak maybe around -3 or a little bit higher than that, and to average around -9 to -6. So to do that, I'm going to boost this gain up a bit. And if you've been following the suggested gain settings for the recording and some of the other things, then that's probably going to do the trick. But you're going to want to play it back and watch the meters and take a look. So let's solo this and play it back. Hello, my name is John. I live in Lancaster with my wife Sally and our 3 children. I work in construction and have owned my own company for the past 15 years. About 2 years ago, my neighbor Bill invited my family and I to LCBC. And the output ceiling is really the threshold, and right now it's set at 0 dB, so we know it's not going to cross over 0 dB. But let's just put this at -1 just to be safe. Let's take a look at a Logic project with multiple tracks in a multi-track mixing environment. So here I have an EDM type song that has both software instruments in it and a few audio tracks as well that are all mixed together. And they're all mixed together here into the final stereo output. So one of the things I want to do before I bounce this down is I want to make sure that I test my final output level at the loudest parts of the song, and make sure that I am averaging around, let's say around -6 dB here on the stereo output. And as I'm mixing this, I want to be watching the stereo output to make sure I'm not kind of creeping up on my level. So to avoid this, as you're mixing, make sure you're mixing at a little bit of a lower level. If you're going to be layering a lot of tracks together, so use your volume fader. Turn down the level, the output levels of software instruments, which always, if you choose a preset in Logic, they're always really hot levels. So you want to bring those down and make sure that your level is averaging about -6 here. So let's just play this back at the loudest part in the track, at the drop here, and see where the level's at. So you can see I'm peaking around -4, and I'm averaging around -6 or -7 or so. So that's where I want to be. So on the stereo output, I'm using the add limiter again. And I'm also using this linear EQ as an equalization in case I want to make any EQ changes to the whole mix. Just one thing to note, if I'm using multiple plugins on my stereo output, I want to make sure that my limiter is the final plugin in that plugin chain. So you can find this linear EQ here in Logic, EQ, linear phase EQ. Let's open that. So linear phase EQ is what I would use for the final output EQ of your mix, and I would use the channel EQ for individual channels within your mix. So one EQ thing I might do on a track like this that's a little bit more EDM, or if you're doing something with a lot of low frequencies, I'm going to want to clean up the very, very low sub-frequencies that we don't need in a mix. So let's turn on the low cut. I'm going to put this to around 30 hertz or so. And let's crank up the Q a little bit. One thing that you can do while you're mixing or you're EQing your final output is use a reference track. So find a track from an artist that you like that's maybe in the same style or genre of what you're doing, and import that audio into Logic here and A/B it against what you're doing, and make adjustments to your mix, so that it's similar to what you're hearing. And you can do that with EQ. So if you're hearing that, for instance, maybe your track has a little less high frequencies than the other track, maybe you'd want to turn on this high shelf and boost a little bit. Or if your thing is too bright, you can cut a little bit or use any of the other EQ features here to match what you're hearing to that other track. Let's take a look at our adaptive limiter settings. So let's make our output ceiling -1 again. And if I'm using a reference track, like I mentioned, to level match to see, if my track is loud as something else that's out there by another artist, I may be tempted to really crank this input volume up so that my track is as loud as something else that's out there. Let's take a look and listen to what that would do. So you see I have a gain reduction here of up to 8 dB, and that my level on my final output was really peaking. So what that's doing is it's over squashing my signal. It's making it sound bad. It's slightly distorting it, and we don't want that. We don't need to do that in this case. So let's back the gain off a bit, put it at a little more reasonable level. Let's try 5.7 dB and listen again. Let's watch the meters and let's listen. So there we kind of have the best of both worlds. We have a track that is, kind of in the same ballpark as maybe some of the other stuff in the similar style. My gain reduction is staying here around 2 to 3 dB, so I'm not squashing it, and I'm retaining some of the musical dynamics of the recording. All right, so let's come back to our baptism recordings here. And now what we want to do is set the cycle range for the start point and the end point for our files that we're going to bounce. So let's take baptism 1 here, and we're going to press C to turn on the cycle range or the locator points. And we're going to make sure that the start here is at measure 5. So that's going to be the start point for all of them. Like I said, we lined up that very first word. And now all I need to do is drag the end point of my locators to around 2 seconds after that last word. And I'm going to press solo, and then I'm ready to bounce down. Now, something very important before I bounce this down is I'm going to want to listen through from beginning to end just to make sure everything is the way it's supposed to sound. So with these baptism recordings, I want to listen through and I want to have my script in front of me and making sure that all the sentences are correct, that all the words are correct, that's exactly the way I want it before I bounce it. So let's open up Logic's bounce dialog box. And to do that, we're going to press the key command, Command B. And we can take a look at some of these settings here. So if I want to create a high quality WAV file, I would choose PCM, which is what we're going to do for this baptism recording. We want it to be high quality. And with a higher quality audio file, it's going to take up a little bit more space on your hard drive, but it's not too big of an issue. These are kind of shorter files here. So file format WAV and resolution 16-bit, that's fine. Sample rate 44.1, that's fine. If I wanted to create an MP3, I could do that. I could click here on MP3. And by clicking, by having both MP3 and PCM selected, I would create both two files, both a WAV file and an MP3 file. Under MP3, I would probably want to make that as high quality as I can. So I would come over here to 320 kilobits per second and do that. A couple other things that I would want to do is remove normalize. So I'd want to make normalize be off so that we can retain the volume levels that we already have set. And mode, I can choose offline so that it bounces in the background and does it fairly quickly. So now I'm ready to go. I want to choose OK. And let's go save the file somewhere. So in my documents folder, I have a folder already called baptisms. And I would probably name the baptism, the name of the person of the baptism story that you're doing so that you can really make sure you know which one it is. And then once I do that, I can say bounce. and it's going to do it really quickly in the background there. Now I can go to the next story. So I'm going to unsolo baptism 1. I'm going to solo baptism 2. And I need to set my locator points for this one. So again, having the same start point for all of them, but a different end point. I'm going to drag this out to the end here of baptism 2. You can zoom in a little bit to just check this end point, make sure it's about 2 seconds after the last word. And then I'm ready to bounce. So Command B again. And now that I've set all these parameters up for that first baptism recording, they're going to stay the same from here on out. So after you're done bouncing all your stories, you're going to want to go back into your bounce folder and listen to each one of them individually again and just check it and make sure it's right from beginning to end. And that's about it for bouncing. So hopefully you guys got something out of this, and thanks for watching.